I don't know if it was excitement, but I think when The Boys comes back, I think The Boys has always had what a lot of modern streaming television hasn't been able to achieve, which is it it has a classic feel. It has propulsion. These are characters that you want to spend time with. Honestly, in season 4 at this point, it's basically a workplace comedy. It sounds weird to think of like Homelander as like a character you want to spend time with, but it's like when he's next to the Deep or A-Train, just hijinks are always going to ensue. And I think Eric Kripke and co. have done a really, really amazing job whenever you watch the show, feeling like you are in safe television hands, that this is at least worth your time. I think the thing that I was worried about is I think the show was showing signs of aging already a little bit, just in terms of like how many more seasons can Homelander and Butcher not kill each other? How many more seasons can we go in this certain rhythm, which is essentially there's going to be new members of the Seven. Those members of the Seven are going to get fucked up and most likely killed. The boys are going to be like, Butcher, we don't want you on the team anymore. And then Butcher is somehow going to find his way back on the team. And Homelander is going to be like, I'm going to destroy the world. And then he's not going to destroy the world. And these are all things that I think are very TV-esque. You kind of have to give yourself over to it. But I was wondering in season 4, I'm like, how do you buck that trend? How do you keep making this as exciting and irreverent and subversive as maybe some of the early seasons?
What's the elixir to that, in your opinion? Some of the common tropes of the show, before we even get into episodes 1 through 3, Homelander has become the lead of the show. Butcher was clearly the lead of the show before, but it seems like the world of the boys now revolves not around Butcher's need to destroy Supes, but around Homelander's angst from being the most powerful being on Earth, from being bad, from being a dad, from being this political figure. It seems like there's even Homelander's view on humanity and how fragile they are and how breakable they are. It's kind of the ethos of the show now, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So before you even saw one frame of it, what would you have wanted to see the show do in order to deal with some of the things that you feel like it was falling into?
So I think what I was hoping for the show, and this is, The Boys is not Succession at all. It's not. But I think Succession made a very, very, what was that?
Because you're about to compare it to Succession. This is a segment I want to do.
Oh boy.
Called Dip on the Chip.
Dip on the chip.
Oh man, sound.
This is when Charles starts a take.
Okay.
And we, after the take, have to decide whether or not Charles has a little bit too much dip.
A dip chip rating?
I'll try to land this plane.
Okay. So you're going to compare The Boys to Succession. Dip on the chip. Let's see if he can do it.
So I'm not comparing The Boys to Succession
Fucking liar.
quality-wise
You've already started.
or about what they're about, but I do think that if you look at spoiler alerts for Succession, if you haven't watched it, you should watch it. Spoiler alerts. Logan, very, very quickly, you realize, became the axis of that show, where it's just like everything kind of revolved around him. And then in that final season, they did the magic trick of, oh, we're getting rid of him when you least expect it.
Yeah.
And that was something where I was just like, in Succession, I think it worked, and in some ways it didn't, because once Logan was gone, you were just like, oh, it reminded you how much he was the son of the show. And I think for Homelander, they have a very similar thing where it's just like, oh, can this show work or exist if you get rid of him? Like, can this show keep going on if the boys are ever successful? Or now that Eric Kripke has revealed that there's only one more season after this, will this season have a stakes problem where we kind of can intuit that Homelander is going to be fine and Butcher is going to be fine? Because Kripke has basically said this show is about these two forces going up against each other. And that's what I think has made the show a little bit like, oh, okay, whatever happens, I know that Butcher is walking away. I know that Homelander is walking away, which sometimes I'm just like, from scene to scene, makes it a little bit hard for me to be worried about them, to be honest.
Where do we give that as far as the chip and the dip rating?
It started strong, but I actually think that that's a decent amount of dip on the chip.
I think it's fair.
It's a fair amount of dip.
Ooh,
I think it's fair.
I disagree. I thought that the chip was pretty clean, but you think he has too much dip on his chip?
I don't think he has
we
too
agree.
much. I think
We
he has a
agree.
decent amount
That's-
because I think
I'll bump it up for Charles.
Drink champs.
Yeah.
But like I'll bump on that a tiny bit because say we have the goalpost of a season finale of season 5, and assuming that like the show's going to play by the numbers and maybe Homelander dies second to last episode, whatever, like even to start of thinking in those terms, I think that's a bit of shooting ourselves in the foot to know that the show can still probably be shocking and still give us something interesting, because you'll note that like at the end of Succession, we had like 4 more episodes after Logan's death for the rest of the team, the rest of the kids to figure out what they were doing, who they were, what they were going to be after all of this. I think if we knock the axis out from under this show and let's say Homelander dies at the end of this season, what does a whole season without Homelander look like?
No, I'm not saying that season would be good, but I even look at it for Butcher, where it's like Butcher's whole thing this season is Butcher gonna die? He only has a couple more months. And I'm like, wait, how can Butcher die? So much of this show is about Butcher and Homelander. So every single time they zoom in on his
little abscess in his brain.
Of his brain, I'm just like, am I really worried about Butcher? And I like leave it being like, no, not really. Like the Butcher, there's no show without him.
Jummy?
I think to expand on Charles's point, it's a little tough because Logan meant so much for those kids and for everybody in that world. So even when he dies, he's still there.
Yeah.
Right? His presence is still felt. For Homelander, it's a little difficult because that's what everybody wants. Right? If he dies, they're like, hey, great job, guys. We did it. You know, how do you continue the story? Is it like The Wire where you kill Stringer, then Marlowe comes in? You know, I don't think The Boys has that. I don't think it's rare to find somebody as central, as powerful as Anthony Starr, as Homelander, and then to come in and have somebody like have another villain. I don't really see it. So to your point, I do think you kind of have to. That's kind of the breaks where Homelander and Butcher. After that, we're kind of just like, all right, cool.
So interesting. I'll step away from the Succession comparison, even though I understand the centrality of the character and how and the comparison now. I do get it. I don't think Homelander has to die. And let me tell you why.
Yeah.
I don't think Homelander has to die because the show, and we'll get into the show now, the first 3 episodes, is essentially about, in my opinion, super beings living with human beings. And Homelander represents the worst of super beings, and Butcher represents the worst of human beings. They are connected through a bloodlust and an obsession with each other that demonstrates something. That if they could figure it out, those 2 characters, then everyone could. Like when you think about Butcher, he treats humanity not that much differently than Homelander does. Homelander is always breaking eggs and making his omelet. Butcher is always breaking eggs and making his omelet, right? And so there's something that both of those characters could realize, or a truce that could come through them, which is very, very interesting. What the sun represents between them. The sun represents the tugging, the push-pull between those 2 characters. Which side is he going to choose? Is he going to choose to be this all-powerful ogre that bends the world to his will? Or is he going to choose to be this rebellious, desperate humanity that is fighting for every inch of its place in this world that's seeking to be dominated by soups? It's interesting. The boy will probably, in my opinion, choose something different, which is what the show is asking. The show is asking, to me, if Butcher can step to the side, if Homelander can step to the side, and if they can choose just something other than what they're doing. So I don't think he necessarily has to die for that. And I think, we can get into it now, in these first 3 episodes, the show to me is hinting at Homelander's rehabilitation to me.
You think
Really?
so?
Yeah,
Wow.
I do. Not rehabilitation in terms of Homelander is going to be the good guy.
Right, but
Rehabilitation in terms of maybe there's a version of the show where Homelander just goes away and decides to go live in his version of the Fortress of Solitude.
like a Dr. Manhattan, I'm tired of these people, goes off to Mars.
Kind of a situation to where all of the silly foibles of people don't seem as pressing to him anymore, and he just decides to deal with his shit. I don't know that Homelander has to die at some point for the boys to finish its narrative arc.